I laughed the moment he called me baby, not because it was funny, but because I hadn't heard that word from him since the day he shattered my heart. And now, lying there in that stark white hospital bed, with tubes running across his skin, Dr. Aaron West looked at me like he'd never stopped loving me. I didn't know whether to cry, run, or slap him back to unconsciousness. 3 years had passed since the divorce. 3 years since he told me I was too emotional for his life, that love was a distraction from his career. I'd walked out that night barefoot in the rain, carrying only my wedding ring and the taste of whiskey on my tongue. Now here he was my ex-husband, the same man who once refused to hold my hand in public, reaching for me in a hospital room, whispering like nothing had ever gone wrong. The nurse had called me that morning, voice trembling. "Mr. Lee, you're listed as Drive West's emergency contact. There's been an accident." I almost didn't come. I almost let the memory of his indifference win. But something in the way she said his name, broken human, made my chest twist in a way I thought I'd buried. When I walked in, I barely recognized him. The man who once stood taller than the world now looked small beneath sterile sheets. His perfect hair, the one he used to fuss over every morning, was matted, his lips pale, and then his fingers twitched. "Aaron," I whispered, half afraid. His eyelids fluttered. A pause. Then that impossible smile. "Baby," he murmured weakly. "You came back." I froze. No one had told me he'd lost his memory. The next few hours blurred. Doctors rushed in, nurses adjusted tubes, and I sat in the corner pretending I wasn't shaking. They told me the concussion had caused partial retrograde amnesia, meaning he remembered some things, just not the recent ones. Apparently, recent meant our divorce. So in his head, Aaron still thought we were married. Still thought he loved me. Still thought I loved him back. The irony was cruel. The universe had a sick sense of humor, handing me the man who broke me, only to make him forget he ever did. He kept asking questions between naps. "How's the apartment? Did you finish painting the living room? Did you ever buy that dog you wanted? Why do you look so sad, baby?" Every time he called me that, my throat tightened. Because in his world, we were still us. In mine, we were ashes scattered across time. When the nurse came to change his I excused myself and stood in the hallway, gripping my chest like I could hold the memories inside before they spilled out. The last time I saw Aaron before this accident, he'd been sitting behind his office desk, emotionless as ever. "You deserve someone more ordinary," he'd said, as if love was a thing you could measure with logic. "I can't be the man you need." And I'd left because I believed him. But here now his hand reached for me again, trembling. "Eli," he whispered softly, "don't leave me again." His voice cracked on again, and for the first time in years, I saw something I never thought I'd see: fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from death or pain. The kind that comes from losing someone you didn't realize you needed until it was too late. I wanted to tell him the truth, that we weren't together, that he'd broken me beyond repair. But looking at him, bandaged and fragile, I couldn't. So I did what I shouldn't have. I smiled and said, "I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, watching his eyes close peacefully, I realized I'd just reopened the wound I'd spent years trying to heal. That night, I sat by his bed while rain whispered against the window. The soft rhythm of the heart monitor pulsed like a distant lullaby. Aaron stirred in his sleep, mumbling words I couldn't catch. I leaned closer and heard my name, over and over. "Eli, I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Tears pricked my eyes. The man who once refused to apologize for anything was now whispering it in his sleep like a prayer. The next morning, when he woke, he was stronger, more himself. His eyes, still that same deep ocean blue, followed me as I poured him water. "You haven't changed," he said quietly. "Still beautiful when you're sad." I almost laughed. "You shouldn't flirt with your ex, doctor." His brow furrowed. "Ex?" My heart skipped. I hadn't meant to say that out loud. His eyes searched mine, confusion spreading across his face. "What do you mean, ex?" I hesitated, then forced a smile. "Nothing. You should rest." But I knew. Sooner or later, the truth would come back like all memories do. And when it did, He'd remember everything. The fights, the distance, the cold silences. He'd remember why I left. And he'd forget this version of us, this fragile, accidental dream where love was still possible. Yet I couldn't help it. Every time he smiled, every time he called me baby, a part of me came back to life. It was dangerous, the way hope sneaks in when you least expect it. Like a thief, like a lover. Told you I'm still strong enough for you. The world went quiet. For a moment, it was just us two men who had once built a world together, standing in its ruins, daring to believe it could rise again. But fate wasn't done with us. That afternoon, as I helped him back into bed, his doctor, a young woman named Dr. Patel, walked in with a clipboard. "Good progress, drive west," she said kindly. "Your memory should stabilize soon." Aaron smiled faintly. "Good. My husband's been worried." My breath hitched. Dr. Patel's gaze flicked to me, puzzled. "Oh? You mean Mr. Lee?" Aaron nodded proudly. "Yes, my husband." There was a pause, and I knew that pause would undo everything. Dr. Patel shifted uncomfortably. Well, Mr. West, we'll discuss more when you're fully recovered." She left quickly, but the silence she left behind was deafening. Aaron turned to me, eyes searching. "Why did she sound weird?" he asked. "Eli, what's going on?" I swallowed hard. "Aaron," I began softly, "there's something you don't remember. Something important." His smile faded. "What do you mean?" I took a breath, but before I could speak, he winced, clutching his head. The machines beeped faster, nurses rushed in, and I was shoved aside as they worked to calm him down. In the chaos, I heard him whisper, broken and terrified, "Don't leave me again, Eli. Please." And just like that, the past caught up with us both. When he passed out again, I stood there motionless, staring at the faint rise and fall of his chest. The monitors beeped softly, reminding me that he was still here, alive, breathing, haunting. I'd spent 3 years learning how to live without him, and now the universe had dropped him back into my arms like a cruel joke. The hospital lights dimmed for the night shift. I stayed. I told the nurses I was his emergency contact, but the truth was simpler. I didn't know how to walk away this time. Later that night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There we were, laughing in front of a half-burnt Thanksgiving turkey, covered in flour after a disastrous baking attempt. I'd forgotten how he used to laugh, with his whole body, shoulders shaking, eyes crinkling until they nearly disappeared. That version of him felt like another lifetime. I remembered the fights too, the way he'd work double shifts and come home smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion, barely saying a word. I'd try to hold him, but he'd always shrug me off with that cold, clinical distance. "You don't understand how hard this is," he'd say. And I'd whisper, "I just want to be part of your world." He never answered. Now, as I sat by his bedside, he stirred again. His fingers brushed against mine, searching blindly until they found my hand. His touch was tentative, like he was afraid I'd disappear. "Eli," he murmured. "Yeah. Promise me something." "What?" "That you won't leave me this time." I swallowed hard. "You should rest, Aaron. I mean it." His voice cracked. "If I wake up and you're gone, I don't think I can handle it." For a second, I saw it, the real him, stripped of ego, of pride, of that shield he always wore. And it broke me. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." He smiled faintly, drifting back to sleep, and I hated how easily he could still make my heart ache. The next morning, I tried to convince myself to leave. But when I reached the door, he woke again. "Where are you going?" he asked, voice rough but awake. I was getting coffee. He smirked, that same arrogant little tilt of his lips I once loved and hated. "You still drink too much of that junk." I rolled my eyes. "And you still judge people before breakfast." He laughed softly, then winced as if the sound hurt his head. "Guess some things never change," he whispered. His words lingered in the air, bittersweet. When the physical therapist came in later, I helped him with the exercises. He was stubborn, always had been. "Let me do it myself," he muttered when I offered support. "You're barely standing," I said. "Don't be ridiculous." I'm a doctor, Eli. I know my limits. Yeah. And I'm the idiot who watched you ignore every single one of them. He looked up sharply, then his expression softened. I missed your sarcasm. You didn't when we were married. A flicker of confusion crossed his face again. Married? Damn. I slipped again. Nothing, I muttered quickly. Focus on walking. He obeyed, though I could feel his eyes on me the whole time, like he was trying to piece together a puzzle his brain wouldn't let him finish. That night, I met Dr. Patel outside his room. Mr. Lee, she said gently, his progress is remarkable, but his memory might return soon. You need to prepare for that. I nodded, my stomach twisting. When it comes back, she continued, he might experience emotional distress. Sometimes patients relive trauma when memories resurface. I let out a bitter laugh. Then he's in for one hell of a shock. She frowned softly. If you care about him, and I can tell you do, just be kind when the truth comes. Kind. It was the one thing I'd stopped knowing how to be with him. Later, I found myself watching him sleep again. His chest rose and fell in rhythm with the hum of machines. In the half-dark, his face looked peaceful, younger. Even. Like the man I first fell in love with. The first time we met, he'd been volunteering at a free clinic downtown. I was there covering a story for a local magazine, and he'd scolded me for taking photos too close to the patients. You're in the sterile zone, he'd snapped. I'd smirked and said, and you're in the grumpy zone. He tried not to smile. Failed miserably. When he woke the next morning, he looked at me differently. There was something sharper in his gaze, curiosity, recognition, fear. Eli, he said slowly, why do I keep dreaming about you crying? I froze. He rubbed his temple. In my dreams, you're leaving. I'm yelling. You're saying something like, I can't do this anymore. My breath caught. I think, he continued, we had a fight. My throat tightened. Aaron. And then I remember the door slamming, he said, voice trembling. The sound of rain. You walking away. Tears burned my eyes. His memory was coming back. That afternoon, he refused to talk to anyone but me. Every word he said cut deeper than the last. You were leaving me, weren't you? He whispered. Yes. Why? Because you stopped seeing me? I said quietly. You started treating me like a stranger in our own house. He looked away, ashamed. I was under so much pressure. The hospital, the residency. You don't have to explain, I said. You already did 3 years ago. He flinched. 3 years. Yeah. He looked down at his hands. God, what did I do to us? For the first time, he didn't sound defensive. Just broken. We didn't talk much after that. The silence between us stretched, filled with the ghosts of everything we never said. But one night, I walked in and found him sitting by the window, looking out at the city lights. Seattle's still beautiful, he murmured. It always was. He turned to me, eyes glistening. Eli, I remember everything now. My heart dropped. I remember the fights, the nights I came home late, the way you'd wait up for me anyway. He took a shaky breath. I remember the day you left. You stood at the door, crying, and I just let you go. Tears filled his eyes. Why didn't I stop you? I had no answer. He reached out, grabbing my hand desperately. I loved you, Eli. I just didn't know how to show it. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Love without warmth isn't love, Aaron. It's survival. He stared at me, pain etched into every line of his face. Then maybe it's time I learn how to love right, he said softly. From that day, something shifted. He started asking about my life, my job, my apartment, the people I'd dated since him. When I told him there hadn't been anyone serious, he smiled faintly, like the confession meant more than it should have. He began walking again, stronger every day. The nurses adored him, the kind of charm I remembered too well. But whenever I entered the room, that charm vanished. He'd go quiet, his eyes softening in a way that made my chest ache. One afternoon, he asked if I could take him outside. We wheeled him into the hospital garden, sunlight spilling over his face. For the first time in years, we sat side by side without any walls between us. "Do you ever think about us?" he asked quietly. "Every day," I admitted. "Even when I try not to." He nodded slowly. "Me too. I keep thinking if I could just go back, I'd do it differently." I looked at him, this man who'd once been too proud to say sorry, now fragile and full of regret. "You can't go back," I said. "But maybe we can start over." He turned to me, eyes wide. "Start over?" I shrugged. "As friends. As people who once loved each other enough to hurt." He smiled sadly. "You think that's possible?" I met his gaze. "I think it's worth trying." That night, as I was leaving, he called out softly, "Eli, yeah. If I learn to love you right this time, would you give me another chance?" My breath caught. "I don't know," I whispered, "but you can try." His smile was faint but real, the kind of smile that could light a dark room. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the divorce. Hope. But the universe doesn't heal hearts without testing them. A week later, Aaron was cleared for discharge. His memory was fully restored, his body stronger, his spirit restless. We stood outside the hospital entrance, the Seattle wind cold against our faces. "So this is it," I said softly. "You're free." He looked at me, eyes full of something I couldn't name. "Not if you're not with me." I laughed quietly. "Don't say things you don't mean." He stepped closer. "I mean every damn word." I froze. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver band, our old wedding ring, the one I'd left behind. "I kept it," he said. "All these years." My breath caught. "I thought I was over you," I whispered. "Then maybe we're both bad at pretending," he said softly. The wind carried his words away, but the warmth stayed, a fragile promise suspended between us. And as the rain began to fall again, I realized something terrifying and beautiful. Maybe this time, love didn't have to hurt. For days after his discharge, the world felt heavier, not because of his absence, but because of everything left unsaid between us. I'd gone back to my small apartment overlooking the Puget Sound, the same one I'd moved into after the divorce. It was quiet, clean, and lonely. My world had become a collection of habits. The same coffee shop, the same evening walk, the same playlist of sad songs. I told myself I was over, but every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened, waiting, hoping for his name. Came 3 days later. "Aaron, dinner?" Not as doctor and patient. As us. I stared at the message for a long time. As us. I didn't even know what us meant anymore, but my fingers typed back before my brain could stop them. Me? Where? The restaurant was the same one where we'd celebrated our first anniversary, a cozy Italian place tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. The lights were dim, the music soft, the air heavy with memories I tried so hard to forget. Aaron was already there when I arrived. He stood as I approached, his posture a little uncertain, as if unsure what we were now allowed to be. He looked different, not just physically, but in his eyes. Softer, grounded, human. "You came," he said quietly. "I almost didn't." "I know," he replied, "but I'm glad you did." Dinner was awkward at first. Every sentence felt like stepping across broken glass. We talked about trivial things, the hospital, his recovery, the weather, anything but us. But when the waiter left and the silence grew, he leaned forward, voice low. "Do you ever regret it?" I looked up. "Regret what?" "Leaving." I let the question hang between us for a while, like smoke from a dying candle. "I don't regret leaving," I said finally. "I regret that I had to." His jaw tightened. "I deserved that." "Yeah," I said softly. "You did." He didn't argue. That, more than anything, surprised me. After dinner, we walked outside. It was raining lightly, the kind of drizzle Seattle was known for, thin, silver, and endless. He offered me his umbrella. I shook my head. "You always hated when I got wet shoes." He smiled faintly. "Still do." We stopped at the corner, under the streetlight where we'd shared our first kiss years ago. The memory hit us both at once. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his eyes darkened. I was scared that night, he admitted. Scared of how much I wanted you. I laughed softly. You were scared of wanting me? He nodded. Because wanting meant I could lose you. And I did. There was so much truth in his voice that my heart ached. He reached out, brushing a raindrop from my cheek with his thumb. I don't want to be scared anymore. For a moment, neither of us breathed. The world was quiet except for the rain, the streetlights, the fragile rhythm of our hearts remembering how to beat in sync. And then I leaned in. The kiss was slow, hesitant, not desperate like before, but tender, familiar, real. When we finally pulled apart, he whispered against my lips, I still love you, Eli. I know, I murmured. That's what scares me. Over the next few weeks, he found excuses to see me. Coffee runs, grocery store accidents, lunch breaks that mysteriously lined up with mine. He was trying and I couldn't deny it. He asked questions he'd never asked before about my dreams, my writing, the people I cared about. He remembered details like the fact that I hated mustard and that I always read before bed. The small things, the things that matter. Sometimes, I caught him watching me with a kind of quiet wonder, as if he couldn't believe I was still real. Once, when I teased him about being too sentimental, he just smiled and said, maybe I'm finally catching up to how much you've always loved. And God, that hurt because it was true. But love doesn't heal overnight. One evening, we had our first real argument since the accident. He'd missed a dinner we'd planned, a small thing, but the past made it bigger. He'd gotten caught in an emergency surgery and forgot to call. When he finally showed up, exhausted and guilty, I was standing in my doorway, arms crossed. You couldn't even text? I snapped. I was in the OR, Eli. A man was dying. I flinched. And what was I? Just someone waiting again. His face fell. That's not fair. Neither was our marriage, I said quietly. Silence. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I'm trying, Eli. I really am. But I can't stop being who I am. I'm not asking you to, I said. I just want you to remember that you're not alone in it anymore. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he stepped closer, took my hand, and pressed it to his chest. Then help me remember, he whispered. And somehow that was enough. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, something fragile and new began to grow between us, not a replica of what we had, but a quieter, steadier love built on the ashes of the old one. We started spending weekends together, cooking, walking by the pier, talking until dawn. He'd fall asleep on my couch with his head in my lap, and I'd find myself tracing the scar on his temple, the one the accident had left behind. Once, I asked him if he ever wished it hadn't happened, the crash, the coma, the memory loss. He looked at me, eyes soft. If it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have found my way back to you. But not everything was easy. Healing never is. One night, he woke up from a nightmare drenched in sweat, breathing hard. I reached for him, and he grabbed my wrist, terrified. Aaron, it's me, I whispered. He blinked, disoriented, then broke down in my arms. I thought I lost you again. We stayed like that for a long time, my fingers tangled in his hair, his heartbeat wild against my chest. I'm not going anywhere, I said softly. He looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. Promise. I promise. Months passed. The leaves turned golden, then red, then brown. Life went on quieter, slower, but full. We started volunteering together at the same clinic where we'd first met. Watching him there, patient, kind, laughing with children, was like seeing a new version of the man I once married. One afternoon, while he was packing up supplies, I found him staring at the ring he always kept on a chain around his neck. You still wear it, I said. He smiled softly. It reminds me that love takes work. Every day. I walked over and placed my hand on his chest, over the ring. Then maybe it's time we make it official again. He froze. You mean? I nodded. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. His eyes filled with tears he didn't try to hide. Eli, he whispered, are you sure? For once, I said, smiling, I am. A month later, We stood in a small garden behind the clinic, just a few close friends, a minister, and the sound of rain on the grass. There were no grand vows, no dramatic speeches, just honesty. I used to think love was something to control, Aaron said, voice trembling. But it's not. It's something you surrender to completely. And I surrender to you, Eli. Again. I took his hands, my heart full. You once told me love was a distraction. Turns out, it's the only thing that's ever kept us alive. We laughed through tears, and when he kissed me this time, it wasn't desperate or fragile. It was right. The rain fell harder, soaking us both, but neither of us moved. After all, we'd been through storms before. This one just felt like coming home. Later that night, lying beside him, I traced the scar on his temple again. You know, I murmured, the day I got the call about your accident, I almost didn't come. He turned toward me, eyes half closed. Then why did you? Because even when I hated you, I never stopped caring. He smiled sleepily. Good thing. Otherwise, I'd still be in that bed waiting for you. I laughed softly. You're impossible. And you love me for it. Maybe I do. He pulled me closer, whispering against my skin. Then don't let go this time. And I didn't. Months later, I wrote an article, How Love Survives the Wreckage. It wasn't about miracles or memory loss. It was about two people who broke each other, learned, and came back anyway. Aaron read it one morning over coffee, smiled, and said, You finally wrote about us. I did. Does it have a happy ending? I looked at him, hair messy, smile lazy, sunlight pouring across his face, and nodded. It does now. Years later, when people asked how we found our way back to each other, I always said the same thing. Sometimes love doesn't die. It just waits for you to be ready to choose it again. And every morning since, I've chosen him. In the soft dawn light, he still calls me baby, sometimes voice half asleep and warm. And every time he does, it no longer hurts. It just feels like the world finally got something right. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.